Chairman, we are now live.
Thanks very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this special meeting of the West Berkshire Council's Governance Committee. I am Councillor Eric Pattenden, Chairman of the committee. I'm joined at this meeting by my fellow committee members, Councillors Dominic Bowick, Jeremy Cottam, Owen Jeffrey, David Marsh, Chris Reed, Louise Sturgis, and Howard Wollaston. Councillors Bill Graham and David Southgate, attending as parish council representatives, are able to fully participate in the meeting, but they will not be able to vote on the matter. I'm supported on this committee by Sarah Clark as the legal representative, Stephen Chard, who will be keeping a record of the meeting, and by Ben Ryan, the Zoom host. We are not anticipating any alarm tests this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm does sound, we must leave the building immediately. Please exit via the safe emergency exit route. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain in the chamber and await instructions from officers. We will adjourn the meeting until such time that is safe to proceed. First on the agenda is apologies. Have any apologies been received?
No apologies received, Chairman.
Thank you.
Screen.
Thank you. I also note on the screen we have Simon Carey.
Yeah, he's an independent.
The independent adjudicator, is that the word?
Well, independent person appointed to the governance committee.
Okay, independent person appointed to the governance committee. Secondly, on the agenda, do we have any declarations of interest? And I note that a number of councillors here today were present at the meeting in March of this year, which I don't think that is necessarily an issue or a declaration of interest, but it's just to be noted. So if there's no declarations of interest, item 4, I'd like to confirm that the complaint that we are hearing today is NDC 0823 in relation to a complaint by Mrs. Lynn Doherty, former Councillor Doherty, about Councillor Adrian Abbs of West Berks Council. Mrs. Clark, would you like to make a comment on the report before we continue?
Thank you, Chairman. The agenda was published with the investigator's report circulated on a confidential basis. We have this evening received confirmation that the independent investigator has no objections to that being published, so that will be made available on the council's website. We have spare copies here if there were any other people in attendance, but in the interest of transparency, that should be available to people so that they have a full understanding of the matters before this meeting this evening.
Thank you. To confirm everybody else's attendance, we have also the independent investigator, Mr. Richard Lingard, who is in attendance virtually to present his report. We have the complainant, Mrs. Doherty, in attendance, and we have the subject member, Councillor Adrian Abbs, also in attendance. Do the parties want to make any representations? Thank you, Mrs. Doherty. No, not yet. Just asking if you will be making any representations. Thank you, Councillor Abbs and Mr. Lingard.
Nothing unless I can assist on the report. No.
Okay, thank you. I've now got some quite long steps to read out, which describe the process that we'll be following this evening. Firstly, I would, with respect, like to remind all those present that we're here today to discuss the complaint as set out in the agenda pack. I would ask all those making representations to the meeting to ensure that all comments and questions are limited to issues relevant to the allegations being considered as part of this complaint. The format for the proceedings this evening will be as follows. Firstly, the independent investigator will present his report to the committee, after which members of the committee will be able to ask questions to elaborate on further details. The complainant and then the subject member may ask the chairman to direct any appropriate questions to the independent investigator. Secondly, following this, the complainant will put forward their case, outlining issues that are detailed in the investigator's report that are disputed. There will then be an opportunity for the committee members to ask questions of the complainant. Thirdly, the complainant may also introduce any witness required to substantiate any matter outlined in the report that they have disputed. The committee may also have the opportunity to ask questions of the witness. Fourthly, finally, the subject member will put his case forward, outlining any matters within the investigator's report that are disputed. The committee will then ask questions of the representative. Number 5, the subject member may also introduce any witness required to substantiate any matter outlined in the report that they have disputed. The committee will also have the opportunity to ask questions of the witness. Number 6, please note that the parties are not permitted under this procedure to engage in cross-examination of the other parties. However, if you have any point of order that you would like to make, please raise your hand and direct your question to me as chairman. Number 7, once all parties have made their representations, the committee may request a party to clarify any issues raised. The subject member will be given the final opportunity to speak to the committee for this purpose. Number 8, once all the representations have been heard and the committee has asked all the questions they wish to, the meeting will be adjourned and I will ask all other parties to leave the chamber so that the committee can make a determination in private as to whether or not a breach of West Berkshire Council's Code of Conduct has occurred. Number 9, the meeting will then be reconvened and I will read out a brief statement as to whether or not the committee has determined if a breach has occurred. A detailed written decision notice will be sent after the meeting, but within 5 working days, which will fully set out the reasons for the decisions of the committee. Number 10, if the committee determines that no breach has occurred, this will be the end of the meeting. Number 11, if the committee determines that a breach has occurred, the committee will hear representations from the legal representative as to whether the committee should take any action against the councillor and what form any sanction should take. Number 12, the subject member will then be able to make representations by way of mitigation and to comment as to which sanctions may be most appropriate. Number 13, the meeting will once again be adjourned and I will ask all other parties to leave the chamber so that the committee can make a determination in private as to which sanctions should be applied. Number 14, the meeting will then be reconvened and I will confirm the sanctions to be imposed. As already advised, a detailed written decision notice will be issued after the meeting, but within 5 working days, which will fully set out the reasons for the decisions of the committee. In order to ensure this matter is dealt with in a timely and appropriate manner, please can I remind participants that any comments should be limited to the complaint under consideration as set out in the agenda. Committee members have had the opportunity to read your written submissions and you do not therefore need to repeat comments detailed in the agenda. Please, however, highlight any issues detailed within the agenda that you wish to draw members' attention to. May I also finally remind you that any questions by the parties should be asked through the chair and questions should be asked for the purpose of clarifying the statement made by the parties. I again ask that if anyone wishes to put a question, they raise their hand. Thank you. Councillor Sturgis.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to ask if reports like this have been published previously. Is that something that would usually happen under these circumstances? Thank you.
So I think yes. I think the the usual format would be that these are dealt with at this stage. So until this stage, investigations are kept confidential, details of the complainant and the subject member. But this is the point at which they would normally go into the public domain, and it is very rare that we would have such matters dealt with in private or in a Part 2 meeting. And in my time here, I can only remember 2 occasions, and they were very particular and actually quite sensitive matters, and one related to an external party and one related to the subject member. So that they were quite clearly unusual, and I think appropriately dealt with in Part 2, but the standard format would be that these are dealt with in public.
Mr. Graham.
Chairman, can I ask that the person hours that have been put into this investigation are published? I think that is most important, because a complaint like this is, I'm not saying it's a waste of time, because obviously it isn't, but we do need to know, I think, what it's costing us to bring charges like this, and they're to be avoided, I think, if at all possible. So a figure for the total hours, cost, whatever you like, I think would be very helpful.
Thanks very much. That's noted, and we'll consider that. Okay, so we're going to start firstly with the independent investigator to present his report, followed by questions from the committee, questions from the complainant through the chairman, and questions from the subject member through the chairman. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, everybody. My name is Richard Lingard. I'm the independent investigator. To a great extent, from my point of view, this evening's proceedings will be something of a rerun of the proceedings of the Governance Committee Advisory Panel, which I attended in person on the 10th of October. Unfortunately, because I had relatively short notice of this meeting, I'm not able to join you in person, but I'm here online. I'm working on the assumption, and I'm sure it's a safe assumption, that everybody has actually read the report in full. It's not that long. You will notice, and this is particularly relevant in view of the comments about publication, that the 4th word in the executive summary is draft. That is a mistake. I will provide Stephen Shard with a corrected version, because this is in fact the final version of my report. The draft was earlier and I failed to change that word, so I'm sorry about that. On the assumption that you've read the report and that you've also watched the video of the incident which was the subject of the investigation, I hope you'll find that the report is self-explanatory. It's, in my experience, it's a straightforward and unusual case in that there are no material disputes on the facts. What occurred at the meeting on the 23rd of March is there for all to see and all to hear. Now, my report explains how I approached the matter. I watched the video several times, first before I did anything else, in order to understand the context and to familiarise myself with the names and faces of the people involved. I looked at the Code of Conduct and the paragraphs that I shall refer to as Councillor Doherty, if that's all right, alleged that Councillor Abbs had breached, and I concluded that no other paragraphs were relevant. When a complainant lodges a complaint, they're under no obligation to specify a paragraph of the code which they consider has been breached. The monitoring officer and or the independent investigator can cast a net wider if they think it's appropriate to do so. But in this case, the only paragraphs that were relevant were the 3 that were cited there. I then interviewed both Councillor Doherty, she then was, and then Councillor Abbs. And you'll have read in sections 4 and 5 of my report what each of them told me, and I won't repeat that now. Although the facts, as I saw them from the video, were quite clear, I was unclear whether Councillor Abbs' contention that there was no opportunity for debate was in fact correct. And I consulted Nicola Thomas on the point, and after having done so, I was satisfied that Councillor Abbs would in fact have had the opportunity to ask Councillor Arderwater a supplementary question following what he, Councillor Abbs, obviously regarded as an unsatisfactory response from Councillor Arderwater. Unfortunately, as you'll have seen from the video, this is where matters got rather out of hand, and there ensued what I characterised at the previous meeting as a rather undignified slanging match. And I have to say that nobody emerged from that with any credit. I had, however, little hesitation in agreeing with Councillor Doherty that Councillor Abbs was disrespectful towards Councillor Arderwater, but, as I said in my report, I don't believe that Councillor Doherty handled the situation as well as she might have done in the heat of the moment. And I explain in section 8 of the report why I believe that Councillor Abbs' conduct fell well short of bullying or bringing the council into disrepute. That section sets out my view that Councillor Abbs was disrespectful towards Councillor Arderwater, but on receipt of Councillor Doherty's comments on the draft, I thought again, and on balance, I did agree with her that Councillor Abbs had been disrespectful towards her as well. Now, I know that Councillor Abbs expressed concern that I appeared to change my position when the facts remained the same, but you'll appreciate that the whole point of submitting a draft report is to allow the complainant and the subject member alike an opportunity to comment on the draft. And I did consider what Councillor Doherty had to say, and I considered that she had a point. In practical terms, I don't believe there's any difference in outcome. I didn't, in response to Councillor Doherty's comments, change my views on bullying or disrepute, neither of which I found. Now, as you know, I'm not the final arbiter in this matter, and that function rests with you, sir, and your colleagues. You are, of course, at liberty to disagree with any of my findings. Now, that is a quick canter through my report, and I've got nothing further to add to it at this stage, although I'm obviously happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cottam.
Yes, thank you. Just one question. Is there not a difference between answering questions and debate? For example, you are allowed a question and then you're allowed a follow-up question. But having chaired committees, I don't feel it's not a debate, is it? Or I'm asking a question. There's a difference between asking questions and debating something.
Are you asking me, Councillor?
Yes, I am.
Well, an exchange of views. I think the point was that Mr. Councillor Abbs felt, as I understand it, that he'd been cut off, and that he wasn't allowed to either to come back to further debate or to ask a question. I think whether it's debate or question is a matter of semantics, to be honest. I think it was what Councillor Abbs clearly wanted to do is to continue the exchange of views and exchange of words, and he wasn't allowed to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Councillor Bowick.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lingard. Did you, when you made your deliberations, consider, indeed observe and consider the tensions that were building in the meeting before things kind of got out of hand?
Yes, I did. I mean, I didn't. My attention was drawn to where the incident started, but I rewound or started the video before that. Yes, I could see that things were getting heated. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a couple of other questions, Chairman. The code of conduct refers to bullying or intimidatory behaviour. I notice in your report you didn't refer to intimidatory behaviour, and I happen to think that there is a subtle difference between bullying and intimidation. Mm-hmm. So did you consider that intimidation was an aspect of the events that evening?
I didn't specifically consider intimidation alongside or as against bullying. No, I mean the allegation was of bullying. And I'm satisfied that it didn't get. It would have to be a lot worse than that to amount to bullying. I've had quite a lot of experience of dealing with bullying, not only in contexts like this, but also during my working life. And I don't believe this approached it either call it bullying or intimidating behaviour. I don't think it was anywhere near that.
Thank you. And in terms of our code of conduct refers to, and so does the Nolan principles, of course, require members to demonstrate courtesy and respect.
Yeah.
And again, your report doesn't mention courtesy, because somebody could arguably be quite courteous while disrespecting another person. And what I saw that evening was discourtesy and disrespect. Would you agree?
Yes, I could agree. I would agree with that. But again, as in response to the previous question, I don't think there's a huge difference between them in terms of the conduct complained of. I think discourteous, disrespect. I think it amounts to much the same thing, to be perfectly honest.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lingard. And to the point about debate, the executive committee is not a debating forum. There will be questions asked. At the end of the day, the decision is made by the executive. It's not made by people in attendance in the committee. Yet, good chairmen, good chairs will allow a free flow of ideas and exchange of ideas. And we saw that evening. Earlier on in the meeting, there was, as an example, Councillor Abbs asked questions of Councillor Sumner and received several responses. There was an exchange. Did you see that, Mr. Lingard, and did you take that into account in your considerations?
I can't recall that particular exchange. What I did, as I've already said, I did look at. I didn't sit through the entire meeting, I have to admit, but I did watch. What I wanted to do was to place the incident in context, and I forget now how far in advance of the incident I watched the tape. Probably about 15 minutes, but I honestly can't remember now. Yes, I'm aware that there was exchange, but when I was asked to look at, it was that incident, those few minutes, that gave rise to the complaint, and that's what I was focusing on.
Thank you.
Mr. Southgate, do you have some questions for Mr. Lingard?
I think I've unmuted myself now. Mr. Lingard, the report you've written refers to the 7 principles of public life. The West Berkshire report refers to the 10 principles of public life.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a typo as opposed to
Probably.
a different?
Probably, yes. It's the Nolan principles anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So the West Berkshire, I think, and the government refers to 10 principles.
Yeah. I will check that. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you.
Mrs. Clark, would you like to just come in there?
So I confirm there are 7 principles of public life, but West Berkshire Council has 10 principles. So our code of conduct refers to the 10 principles, but the Localism Act refers to 7. So
Chairman, if I may just say, it is basically like the school rule book. It's behave yourself, good manners, and it's statements of the obvious in many respects, whether it's 7 or 10, but they cover much the same ground.
Thank you. Any more questions from the committee? Okay. In that case, Mrs. Doherty, would you like to put some questions to Mr. Lingard?
Thank you. Mr. Lingard, nice to see you again. Nice to speak to you. Just a question from me about the Constitution, because the complaint that I put in was around bullying and intimidation, and you focused on the word bullying. Also, you focused on a piece of action that took place off of camera. So you yourself state that the cameras weren't on and you don't know what was said at that moment in time. So I just wonder how you draw that conclusion to not know that there was intimidation taking place at that point.
Well, the cameras were on, but the sound wasn't. I think that's right. And I just had to draw a conclusion from what I saw. It's obviously had the sound been recorded, then I would have had a better idea. But nevertheless, I still I stand by the my finding that Councillor Abbs was discourteous to to Councillor Arderwater. He was discourteous to you. I could not see from what I couldn't infer from what I heard and saw whether he bullied you by in walking past you. I mean, I know bullying doesn't necessarily have to consist of a series of actions. It can just be one incident, but there was no way in which I could be sure, even on the balance of probabilities, that what Councillor Abbs did or said by the way of his body language or his speech as he walked past you could amount to bullying.
Can I just a point of order, because I think within the complaint itself, we referred to incidents because the cameras and the microphones were stopped and we all adjourned from this room. Those that were here will remember. And it was the comments that were made to me as I walked past Councillor Abbs that were highly intimidating to me.
Yes, I'm sorry. You walked past him rather than vice versa. That's quite right. Yes. Yeah. But I was unable to work, unable to infer, as I say, what he said to you, and I have to work on the balance of probabilities. I stand by the bullying, the disrespect, and I think that was plain.
Can I, just a point of clarification, did you ask any other witnesses in the room of what they'd heard or seen, whether they felt it was intimidating behaviour?
Because I was witnesses are witnesses to fact. It is my judgment as to whether or not there's been a breach of the code. And it's a judgment with which the committee are, of course, at liberty to disagree.
Thank you. Councillor Abbs, any questions for Mr. Lingard?
Yeah, I guess just a quick one, and thank you, Mr. Lingard. You have said it, but just to confirm, your initial draft gave no weight to Councillor Doherty's part of the complaint, only my actions against Steve Ardar-Walter, and it was only. Can you confirm that it was only after discussing with her that you actually changed your mind and decided to add her name into the conclusion that you came to?
Yes, that's the whole purpose of the draft report, because I don't have the monopoly of wisdom or good ideas, and if there was no draft, the whole purpose of the draft is to give everybody involved, the complainant and the subject member, a chance to, as I did, if you remember, when I produced a written version of the notes which I made after our interviews. I send that out. So have I missed anything? Have I forgotten something? Have I misinterpreted something? And the purpose of the draft is for exactly the same reason, because it gave me pause for thought, and I did modify my view.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so we move on to.
Sorry, Chair, am I allowed to put one comment that's been made in context in terms of this business of intimidation off camera and what was it, off audio?
I think that will come into your oral submission.
Okay, I'll try and remember to say it then. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mrs. Doherty, would you like to make your oral submission? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for inviting me along this evening. It's nice to be back. Just so you're all aware, I was a councillor for West Berkshire for 8 years, and like many of you new to this, when you were first elected, you were asked to sign up a set of rules that said you would abide by the Constitution. I noticed within the responses we've received from Councillor Abbs that he doesn't like the Constitution, and his argument is he behaved as he did because he doesn't like the rules that govern us all. My concern, and it was a concern that I raised with Mr. Lingard, was we will see a breakdown in democracy if we cannot respect the rules that govern us all. Our Constitution is that. There was a working party, a cross-party working party, looking at great depth of the Constitution and how we operate. I believe it was only a few months earlier that everybody actually agreed to that. And I would have suggested that if you didn't like the Constitution and the rules that you agreed to abide by, you don't sign up to become a councillor, because we all know that we operate under those Nolan principles, and that is part and parcel of our role. I'd also suggest that if you're a councillor, whether you're in the middle of a formal meeting or whether you're walking out the door, your conduct reflects on us throughout. Having chaired many a meeting, I have to say that respect for the chair and listening to the chair has been something that the majority of people that I've worked with have done. And that's whether that's here as the executive, full council, parish meetings, planning meetings. Unless there is respect for the chair, then we will see a breakdown in democracy. And that was my concern, that we were not respecting the rules in which we are governed by on that particular night. If you watch the recording, Councillor Arderwater is desperately trying to respond to Councillor Abbs, but Councillor Abbs will not let Councillor Arderwater do that. And for me, there is the breakdown in debate. So I would just draw your attention to that. We'd had a long meeting and we knew we had a lot of business of the day to get through. I'm quite interested as well as regards to my response on the evening. Just so you're all aware, I was sat exactly as our chairman is this evening between our legal representative and our chief executive, both of whom, if you watch the recording, you can see I turned to and asked for their guidance and their advice on handling the situation, both of whom gave me that response, and that was what I conducted my actions on that evening. So I understand that we could have both done things better, but I was following the guidance given to me by our officers sat on either side of me. The only other thing I wanted to add, and it was a question that I raised with Mr. Lingard, was the question around conduct and behaviour and when it becomes the difference between bullying and intimidation. Here at West Berkshire, we have had a huge issue in attracting female candidates to this chamber. And when we see performances, as we saw on that night, and the type of comments that were thrown at me because it was outside of the meeting, then I really am concerned that if as members we don't uphold the respect for one another in the first place. And in my view, there was also a breach of a second complaint with regards to intimidation. No one else in this room can tell you how I felt when I had to walk past Councillor Abbs. No one can tell you what that feels like, but I can assure you it feels extremely unpleasant and uncomfortable, and a reason why I would imagine a lot of people do not want to put themselves in the position as elected representatives. Councillor Abbs talks about a personal choice of action from me. My actions weren't a personal choice. They were following the rules of this administration, this council, as I have for the last 8 years. And I hope that anyone that sat through a meeting with me can attain to that, because I've certainly tried to, where I can, enable people to share their views and let them have that opportunity, while being conscious, just as any other chair is, that there is business of the day that has to be got through in a timely way to ensure decisions happened. So I'm here today to hear your views, but I wanted to make clear that in my view, there was a complete and utter lack of respect in this chamber that night, not just for Councillor Arderwater, but for the position of chairman of the council or the meeting. And there is intimidation, as far as I am concerned, of myself from a member of this chamber.
Thank you. Members of the committee, do you have any questions for Mrs. Doherty? Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, just one thing really. It's about the comments in Appendix F1 to Mr. Lingard. That's in order, Chair. About when it says comments from complainants on the investigator's report. You say that this wasn't an isolated incident. And I'm just wondering about that, because obviously we are just considering an isolated incident, but are you suggesting that this was a cumulative thing, that this was the worst? So this, you complained about this one because it was the worst example, or because it was a typical example? I'm just not, there's been several people have already referred to the context of the evening, and I'm just wondering if this was something where this had been building up and you and that's why you're complaining, or just because this was the worst example. That, do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from, Councillor Marsh. And it's a question I've reflected on over the sort of months that have come past since then. And I think anyone that's been in this chamber has seen time and time again that Councillor Abbs has struggled with some of our rules of debate and how a meeting should operate. So I agree with you. I was probably quick to come to the gravel because I knew where this could go from previous experience. I had many examples, and I probably couldn't sit and look back over all the recordings to find examples where Councillor Abbs had interrupted other people when they were trying to speak and wouldn't listen to the chairperson of the time and would try to talk across people. So yes, I do recognise in myself, but I probably was of the view that actually I am going to go and try and stop this before it escalates, having had previous experience.
That's fine, thank you.
Councillor Berwick.
Thank you, Chairman. Mrs. Doherty, we know, don't we, that that period, which starts actually in December through until the new corporate year, is a very busy one, isn't it? And the atmosphere in which that period passed last year, earlier this year, was quite it was quite kinetic, wasn't it? There was a lot of it was with the forthcoming election. There was a lot more, let's say, dynamism in those meetings. Would you share my view that there was a build-up of tension, not just through the meeting, but through the series of meetings that runs up until May?
I think you're right, Councillor Berwick. It's a tense time. I wouldn't ever just, shy away from that. It's a tense time. I think on that particular evening, there was an awful lot of business that we had to get through, and we were doing so. I think there has been growing tension, obviously, between different party politics and how that plays out. But I have found in that everybody else has been respectful and been able to maintain and remain within the terms of the Constitution. So while there has been heated discussions and debate, they have remained respectful and within the realms of the Constitution. I don't think this evening that we're looking at, Councillor Abbs managed to do that.
Any other questions? If not, I've got one. You said, Mrs. Doherty, that in hindsight, you might have handled it differently. And I wonder, how that might have, what you might have done differently.
I think what's upset Councillor Abbs was my use of the gavel. One of the things, because I had dealt with him previously, as I had taken guidance and advice from the monitoring officer and from the chief executive about how to handle that when you are in the position of chair. And I was told in the first instance that you should use the gavel. If you can't, if that doesn't get the response that you need, then you should stand. And I've spoken to various chairs that have been here for a long time, very experienced chairmen of this council that have been telling me about ways in which to do that. When we got to that point, I then referred to my legal advice to say, and my chief executive, what now? And I was told at that point that I could pause the meeting, stop the meeting, and ask Councillor Abbs to leave the room, which is what I did.
Okay, thank you. If there's no more questions, do you have any witness that you'd like to call to substantiate any matter that you have disputed in the report?
No, I don't.
Thank you. Okay, in that case, we move to Councillor Abbs to make your oral submission.
Thank you very much. An interruption was made, which is clear in the video. There's no doubt about that. However, it was nothing unusual throughout the whole period of 2019 to 2023, and certainly not unusual naming me as the only person or inferring I was the only one that might have done these actions. Well, you just have to look at the video record to see that's certainly not the case. So the first context of this is the way that last meeting was handled was not unusual at all, actually. The leader has admitted herself that she was leader at that time, sorry, has admitted herself she was very quick to the gavel. It's something I wrote down here. It's not the only time during her tenure that she used the gavel. It wasn't the first time. So the leader at the time actually didn't even follow the correct process. So she may well be, and she's been very careful with her words that she's using here, saying that I looked to my officers to my left and my right and so asked them for advice, and clearly she got bad advice because she asked me to leave the chamber without following the constitution, without following their own rules that she sets great store by, saying I always follow the rule. Well, she didn't. She clearly doesn't understand the constitution either. It's a big document. I think I've even seen the sorry if I'm calling you Sarah, but Ms. Clark, I've seen you have to go and have a look at the constitution, okay, thinking that everybody understands every word in the constitution and therefore can always abide by the letter of that constitution at all times. It is a bit of an ask in the extreme, to be honest. The other thing is, during all this time, from 2019 to 2023, I can't imagine actually any other scenario. I'm trying to think where debate during an exec meeting was actually allowed. Now, the asking a supplementary question during members' questions and public questions, we all know that exists, and we follow that all the time. But from every exec and council meeting I've ever been to, generally you ask your question and it's up to the largesse of whoever's chairing the meeting to allow supplementary questions or not. The tone of the previous administration was never to, or if not never, very rarely to ever allow supplementary questions. So to state that I would have been given the opportunity to ask a supplementary question, I'm sorry, that's not my learned experience between 2019 and 2023. If I look at how the administration changed in May, and I watched a few meetings and attended a few meetings since then the new leader does allow for debate. And it's a different tone that we say. And that tone is, I think, the all-important thing, because the Nolan principles, or the 10 principles that we follow here at West Berkshire Council, they're all derived from public life. And if I watch debate in Parliament any day of the week, interrupting somebody is not going to mean I end up in the situation I'm currently have before you as the panel, judging on whether or not I did something that breaks the principle. Because reality is, this is the way that the administration was run during that period. So there's nothing unusual. So the day-to-day process is as it always was. Now, the fact that the leader was finding between, I think it was December and January, a very stressful time, I imagine so, because there was an election coming up, and I'm sure they thought they didn't have very good prospects, but that's not actually my issue. Yeah. She's also remembering we had a budget in between. That's always a very stress. Every time we have a budget, every year. And I'm sure this next March, when it comes to the budget again, it will be just as fraught with people trying to get their points across and, and so on and so forth. So I guess what I'm saying to you all is that within the context of how the leader chose to run the council at that time, no matter what is written down in the actual constitution, and whether you can find a technical fault with an interruption or not, it doesn't change the tone that was set by the administration at the time and the leader at the time. And it was perfectly in line with the tone of the administration of that time. Now, in terms of intimidating someone, which it's a really harsh word to be throwing at somebody, let's try and put that in context a little bit. I'm sitting where Councillor Owen is at that time, and actually Councillor Doherty. So I don't stand up during this so-called intimidation. I merely turn around as she's walking by to go to the toilet, after she has already broken their own constitution in terms of asking me to leave the meeting. So within that context, I really don't see why this case has been brought forward. And I am also a little curious as to just how much time and effort and cost has been thrown at for what me looks completely politically motivated complaint to try and discredit a sitting councillor. I think it has little to no merit, and I hope you come to the same conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, questions from the committee. Councillor Berwick.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Abbs, my mother would say to me, if I've referred to her as she, who am I, the cat's mother? For you to, excuse me.
Sorry, what are you referring to? Something I just said?
I'm being interrupted here.
I do
Chairman.
apologise. I don't understand when I said she. Did I say she at some point?
Can we just let Councillor Berwick put his question?
Thank you. So the way you refer to Mrs. Doherty, I don't think is respectful. Do you?
I thought I referred to her most of the time as Councillor Doherty or leader. If I used the word she at some point, I think you're stretching, to be honest, Councillor Berwick.
Thank you for your reply. Now, Councillor Abbs, I have been an elected member since 2011, and there are plenty of people in the council who have longer memories than I. I can never remember a meeting where I've seen such behaviour. So for you to say that there's nothing unusual about the events of that evening surprises me. Why do you and I have a different recall?
I guess mainly because you don't listen to the many times Councillor Ross McKinnon chose to have a go at Councillor Jeff Brooks. Just to name two people that regularly batted with each other. So I don't understand why you don't see the same as me, Councillor Berwick.
Thank you. And during that time, during those 11 years, when there have been opportunities for members who've asked a question to ask a supplementary, they've always been allowed, as far as I can recall. Again, why do our recall differ?
Likely because you were part of the administration at the time, and the administration always gets the last word. Based on the Constitution, it's the way it's set up. You're asking me to answer questions that you really need to ask yourself. I don't know why you remember the things in the way you do. I'm not you. I remember the things I do, and I see nothing wrong or nothing unusual in that behaviour with that administration. And by contrast, with a change of administration, we see a completely different tone.
Thank you. Now, I think that we probably also differ in the definition of debate, because, of course, as I mentioned earlier on, the executive committee, this is my take on it, and I'm happy to be contradicted, but it's not the debating. Sorry, are you distracted?
No, I'm just waiting till you get to the point.
So it's not a debating body. As the opposition, prior to the election, you had the opportunity to ask questions for clarification and understanding, indeed to make comment. And now as opposition, now that the Conservative Party members are in opposition, we have that same opportunity. But at the end of the meeting, all decisions are taken by the executive committee. There is no cross-party participation in the actual decisions. So do our understanding of the term debate differ? And if so, in what respect?
No, I think you're really making a statement more than anything else, Councillor Berwick. But
I'd like an answer, though.
If you like, would you like to answer before I finish my answer? Or is this, I'll leave you to interrupt me. No, okay. So the point I made to Mr. Lingard was there was no opportunity for debate, and you've just confirmed, in fact, there's no opportunity for debate. So where am I supposed to go with that?
Thank you. I think we're clear on that. My last question, Councillor Abbs, is: do you have any regrets about your behaviour that evening?
Yeah, I do actually. I have regrets that we, for 4 years of opposition, that everything that came from the opposition, everything that seemed to come out of my mouth in those 4 years, was treated as in a political way, as though it was some kind of football that should be kicked around or kicked back because you're somehow defending a goal. I've never approached politics in that way, and I happen to sit as an independent now because my own principles say that I actually don't want to have politics in every single decision-making process that we do. I'd actually like to see a bit more cooperation. The Constitution, Councillor Doherty is correct in that I do have some issues with it, but it can be changed through the proper programs. But, the person in charge is the person that sets the tone, no matter what the Constitution says. They have an opportunity to keep things open and fair and inclusive. If they choose not to, it's bound to leave anybody who's not in the administration rising in terms of where am I going to be able to get my point across? Because there is no opportunity to do it. So yeah, I would like to see a bit more politics taken out of the chamber. That would be very good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the committee? I've got one same question that I put to Mrs. Doherty. You know, given your time again, let's say, would you do anything differently, Councillor Abbs?
Yeah, I think when I initially said no, it would have been good to have the exact point of the Constitution as to why I was saying no, I won't leave the chamber. Because actually she hadn't followed, sorry to apologise to Councillor Doherty, the leader had not followed the appropriate process to eject me from the chamber. So actually the leader had no right, the chairman had no right to actually ask me to leave the chamber. And I shouldn't have. I should have waited until they'd gone and sought clarification, taken the vote of those present that evening, and then they would have been entitled to ask me to leave. But that wasn't the case.
Okay, thank you. And do you have any witness that you'd like to call to substantiate any matter?
I think the video isn't a witness enough, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to the next section in the on the agenda to clarify any issues raised during the presentations. So we have we all have an opportunity, I think, to put questions through the chair to clarify any understanding of what took place. After that, Councillor Abbs will be invited to make a final comment. So any questions? No. Thank you. Okay. So Councillor Abbs, you can now get an opportunity to make any final comments.
Well, I've already spoken for quite a bit, but one thing that's been said was build-up of tension. That appears to have been a comment over the 4 years, but specifically between December and the final meeting. Yeah, I guess once you start setting a tone, people will feel slightly more frustrated if you don't change that tone. But an important thing that Councillor Logarty just said was an awful lot of business to get through. And I've seen this time and time again at meetings where there isn't enough time to have debate, and so debate isn't allowed. Now, I challenge any of you. Some of you are returning councillors. Some of you are new councillors. I've challenged anybody not to feel slightly frustrated if you're not given enough. Now, I happened to chair Western Area Planning for a while, and sometimes we have to really push the boundaries to allow proper debate to go on, to allow a safe decision to be made. So when the executive, which this was an executive meeting, is making decisions and invites people to ask questions and then kind of call it debate, but it isn't actually debate, because we all know what a debate is and we all know what a question and answer is. So we're not debating, we're actually in a Q&A, okay? And we're not even really going for it. The faster you try and do that, the less secure the executive's decisions will be, because they are barely challenged. And having been a member of the executive for a few months, I can see how it basically, most of the pre-work has to be done before you even arrive at the chamber. So I get it. It's just, unfortunately, it needs more time to allow things to be done properly. And on that evening, clearly, to our own admission, there wasn't enough time to get through the business of the evening.
Okay, thank you. So we've got to the point where we will adjourn this meeting. So I'm going to ask all other parties to leave the chamber so the committee can make a determination in private as to whether or not a breach of West Berkshire Council's Code of Conduct has occurred. We'll then reconvene and I'll read out a brief statement as to whether or not the committee has determined if the breach did occur. So thank you very much, and Okay, we'll see you shortly. Thanks very much. Thanks for coming back. So the committee's had a very considered debate over all of the points raised. And we have found that Councillor Abbs did breach paragraph 4.1a of the West Berkshire Council Code of Conduct. We've also found that there was no breach of paragraph 4.2a and also no breach of paragraph 4.2f. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mrs. Clark, Councillor Abbs can now make any representations by way of mitigation and to comment.
Yeah, I think so. I think the processes I'm meant to refer or advise the committee and the subject member of the potential sanctions. At this point, the monitoring officer is meant to advise the parties and the committee as to the potential sanctions that could be applied following a finding that there has been a breach of the Code of Conduct. These are set out in the Constitution and these are repeated at page 47 of the agenda pack. In summary, these are that a formal letter could be sent to the subject member from the chairman of the governance committee indicating a failure to comply with the code. A member could be removed from a particular committee, which can only be achieved in consultation with the group leader. I think it should be noted that only council can remove a member from any committee if a member's been appointed to a committee by council. A formal censorship motion could be made via council, again initiated by the chairman of the governance committee. A formal press release could be sanctioned by the governance committee summarising the breach, or a local resolution acceptable to the complainant and the subject member could be approved as sanctioned by the governance committee. I think at this point, for the committee, I should also point out that the advisory panel, which met on the 10th of October to consider the investigator's report, made a recommendation as to sanction, which is a formal letter to the subject member from the chairman of the governance committee indicating the failure to comply with the code. I think this committee needs to bear in mind that the advisory panel wouldn't have heard any mitigating factors from the subject member. So this committee needs to come to its own conclusion, having heard any submissions that the subject member wishes to make.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Abbs, I wonder if you have any comments to make on sanctions that could be applied or other statements by way of mitigation.
Not too much to say, to be honest. Little disappointed in that you should reach that conclusion based on what was essentially the tone that was set by the administration at the time. I have no idea which of the sanctions you are thinking of, so it's somewhat difficult to say any more, really. But little disappointed because I don't think, if we look at that meeting and put it in the context of any other meeting, it would have been pretty normal, except for the leaders' own actions. I'm also not clear as were the findings both against Steve Ardell-Walter and Councillor Doherty, or just one of them. So if you could clarify that for me, that'd be great. But at the end of the day, you will make your decision as to what, whatever, call it punishment if you like, you think is necessary. I just would point you back to day-to-day life in Parliament. And if you are going to find me, well, you have found me complicit on breaking the laws, so according to the Constitution, then you're going to have to be looking at a series of complaints pretty much after every meeting, where somebody will have interrupted somebody else. And it's going to be very difficult to manage and very expensive for something that could be better managed by the chair.
Okay, thank you. And to clarify, the breach of paragraph 4.1A was in respect to Councillor Udderwater and Councillor Doherty. So we'll now adjourn again and consider sanctions that will be applied. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So the committee has considered possible sanctions, and we've decided that we will be writing, or there will be a formal letter to Councillor Abbs from the chairman of the Governance Committee, indicating that there has been a breach of paragraph 4.1a of the West Berkshire Council Code of Conduct. I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and note that a full decision notice will be drafted and circulating within 5 clear working days of this meeting. With that, thank you. The meeting is closed.